Hello, welcome back to my channel. This video will be a bit different to some of the other videos. As you can see, I'm not in my usual place. Today, I join you from my shed, or otherwise known as man cave, which is a place I like to spend quite an amount of time when I'm not doing the usual things of work. In here is where I do a lot of work on boat stuff, car stuff, bike stuff. And it's generally, I think every man should have their man cave. So it's the little oasis. Needs a bit of a clean, but a different location to shoot, and on a topic that's different to one I would usually record on. So I know it's been a while. Hope to try to get back to making more videos. But in today's video, I want to share a story that, upon reflection, is quite fitting at the moment, and also is going to outline, in a way, a psychological concept that, due to a personal experience I had with, of all things, a tire pressure gauge. Yes, a tire pressure gauge. So if you're interested in abnormal psych or anything like that, you probably should turn off now. This will not be what we'll be just doing on this video. So this is an experience I had, a learning, you might say, and I'm using it because in its simplicity, there's actually something profound in it. And also there's a sort of a nice story as to why I happen to have my hands on this tire pressure gauge. So hopefully you'll stay with me. Not sure how long this will be, but thanks for coming, and I'm going to get into it. So in psychology, there's a concept called heuristics. The idea of a rule of thumb. Uh, I know I said I wasn't going to get into things that might be mental health related, but I'm not. I'm not. But just to bear with me for a second, there's a thing called a heuristic, and we all use them. Heuristics are important. They're kind of like problem-solving rules of thumb that we rely upon. We have heuristics for different things. But in this story, it's sort of the heuristic, or more appropriately, maybe the schema that I had about a certain thing led me to a false conclusion. And as you watch this, I'm sure many of you will be able to reflect on exactly the same thing that's happened to you. And it's a story relating to, as I said, a tire pressure gauge, and particularly this one. Now, I'm not sure if you can see it. I'm trying to see it there. Okay. This is a tire pressure gauge. Nothing profound in that. Tire pressure gauges, every motorist, cyclist should have them. Amazingly, many don't. And of those who do have them, they don't often use them. And from my perspective, tire pressure gauges are just like a basic but important tool. For three things really. They keep your vehicle safe, having the correct pressures. That's the first thing. Second thing is it helps with the longevity of your tires. And the third thing it does is helps economy. In this particular story, the use of the tire pressure gauge is is the thing that makes this quite humorous in a way, and makes an important point. But to start with, I'm going to back up and tell you a little bit about why am I making this video on a tire pressure gauge. Well, because it's always more than the thing, isn't it? It's always, as we say, the thing behind the thing is the thing. Well, I'm going to give you a bit of a story about this. So, a number of years ago, uh, a lovely neighbour living a couple of doors up died suddenly. His name was Anthony, and Anthony was quite a guy. Smart, funny in his own way, and always helpful. Always would lend a hand out. And that hand could be in many, many forms. Could be in the form of actually doing something for you practically, or indeed it could be in a bit of advice. And Anthony worked on cars, but he was more than a mechanic. And I say that without any disrespect to mechanics, but he was a mechanic and an engineer. As far as I know, he'd studied engineering at some point, and you could tell that he had because he always had a way. He had a way of fixing something. And I got to know him back in 2006, so quite a time. And again, because we were neighbors. Um, and one of the ways I got to know him, because he was fairly quiet, but we got to know each other because, like him, I've an interest when I'm not doing my normal work. I love engines, cars, boats. I love these things. But also, I learned from my dad um, many, many years ago that, you know, it was important to be able to work on things yourself. Otherwise, you're left with sending them into places. And sometimes even that can go wrong, right? But I remember kind of it being a thing that, particularly with boats being out in the water, if something is going to go wrong, there's a saying in the sea, if it's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong out there. It's not going to go wrong when you're tied up to the quay. So knowing how to do a few things, being familiar with things, being aware of what to do was always something that I grew up with knowing, in terms of knowing the importance of that. Um, it was many years before I actually had an interest until I started doing my own boating, doing my own motorbiking, and then I took on kind of learning those things. However, when I met Anthony, um, if he saw me with my head under the car, he'd be straight down and he'd be down to us. What are you doing? You know, what's happening? What are you looking at? And I'd show him something, and inevitably he'd have a tip, some way of doing something that would really, really help me out. And equally, if I saw him working on a car, I'd often rock up to see because he could get some interesting vehicles he'd be working on, from like high end modern ones to effectively classics. There was a beautiful MG I saw him working on once. So he would do this, and he could share with me maybe a challenge he was having, and it was interesting to learn with him. So in fact, funny story. I remember one time there was a customer who dropped a car, and he told me what had happened. A customer had dropped a car up to him. The car had, I think, gone to a main dealer. The main dealer had said in order to get to the bolts they needed to get to, they'd have to drop the engine, and of course that was going to cost a small fortune. So they brought it to Anthony, and Anthony in described very eloquently how he actually got to those bolts. It was a funny one because what it was I think it was a starter motor or something on a BMW or something like this. And anyway, the situation was that the bolts holding the starter motor on were facing forward. So if you were sitting in the driver's seat, you can imagine, right? It was under the bonnet where the engine is. The starter motor was connected to the engine, but the bolts were going in forward out through there. So right behind those bolts was the subframe. So you couldn't back the bolts out. There was something in the way. So the procedure he was being told was to drop the engine. That way, the customer was told, drop the engine, we have to get it out. Of course, brought it to Anthony. What Anthony did, this just gives you an example of the kind of the ingenuity that he had. Um, if he used a number of different extension bars for a ratchet, and whereas I might have two or three of those, he would have had a lot more. And he joined them one to another, to another, to another, to another, to another, creating about 3.5 foot or 4 foot of extension. He then put a ratchet on the end of it and went to the back wheel of the car and offered up the connection all the way to the starter motor and undid the nuts. That's what you want. That was what he could do. Um, so it was interesting. Anyway, also on at least one occasion I remember quite well, my dad was on holidays and I developed a major problem. Yeah, the Volkswagen car uh, developed a rear wheel brake caliper seizure. And for anyone who's had this, it's not fun, but it pretty much immobilizes the car till you've got it sorted. So basically, what had happened was the caliper, which puts pressure, which exerts pressure onto the brake pads, which then exert pressure onto the rotor or the brake disc, had seized, and it seized in the brake position. So that as you tried to drive, you were getting burning, and it wasn't coming off. And my dad was away. Dad was very handy with those things, and I remember just going to Anthony, and he said, "Yeah, I'll have a look at that. No problem at all." And it was a case of drop the key with it and leave with him and leave it. Next day I came back. Car was in his own drive. He had the brake caliper changed, and then in real, not even neighborly style, but just in 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 the style of just decent human being, which he had in spades. What he did was he having fixed it, he said, "Now don't pay me until it goes through the NCT." Well, so anyway, went through the test, got paid. So I'm just couching this. I know, forgive me, we're coming to the story. Amazing how these things can grow arms and legs. Hopefully, you're not bored yet. Anyway, very interesting. A lot of different sort of tips we shared, but tragically, he died quite suddenly. And when he died, I got to know his sister, who and the family who had to arrange to deal with the very difficult job of managing property. What do you do after that? And um, so I was asked if I would keep an eye on the house. I was given a key, and I'd keep an eye on the house. And there was a very, very hard kind of freezing, and just to make sure pipes didn't freeze. So I'd be in and out. And then the day came when, well, things had to be cleared out. And I had the honor of being, as I see it, being gifted and receiving a number of tools, including, which I'll just show you now, one of his toolkits. This, to be exact. So, again, can't quite open it here, but these toolkits, these cantilever, these old boxes that we look as traditional mechanics toolkits, these were made when stuff was stuff, you know what I mean? And in there, he had his tools. And I made a commitment to myself, and a sort of promise to myself and to Anthony, that I would effectively leave that box relatively unchanged, with the belief, call it what you will, that the best thing for me to do would be to, when jobs come up on the car, rather than going to my own set of tools, rather than going there, that I go to his box. And that's what I've done. And to this day, every car I've gone to work on of my own, or anything I've had to do on a car, or indeed in a bike, the tools went in there. You see, I believe that within that box he had there's probably a lifetime of tools, but not just any old tools, but tools that have the particular right size millimeter bolt drive for the particular nut you need to remove. And because he's worked on so many cars, it's kind of like I've never put my hand to it and not been able to find something that will work with what I'm doing. So, and it also feels like he's with you doing it, so that's kind of nice. Um, so on any car bike, the only thing where perhaps I would have had to go to my own toolkit would have been something to do with an engine for an outboard motor, a boat, but that's boat stuff. Okay? So there can be little differences. But other than that, everything I turned my hand to that I need to do with a car, I've been able to do with what was in there. So something nice about that. But as well as that, and now we're coming to the point, there was this really beautiful, and it is beautiful. People watching this who aren't into these things might think I'm a bit tapped saying this, but those who know. A beautiful, as I showed you there, tire pressure gauge. Now, I mentioned why tire pressure and all that is important. But of course, the purpose of this story is a little bit different. When I got this, one thing struck me really off the bat. The first thing was, and I know you can't feel it, but if you, again, I'll show you again. Yeah, beautiful. What this is okay, it's measuring pressure in bar and PSI, pounds per square inch. And if you just look here, there's a little, do you see this? This can move. And this is for adjusting to zero, dead on zero. So before you test any pressure, you can calibrate it very handily. And also you can do it with a glove on you. You know, it's not this finicky rubbish that you have these days. And there's a button, your reset button, okay? And this goes on the tire valve. I'll just explain this in a second. So when you have this in your hand, it's a bit like when you have anything of quality at all. When you've got anything of quality, there's always seems to be, well, many things might be able to measure something really well, but not many of those things last and do it for a long time. This is the sort of thing that outlives the person. It'll outlive me probably. This is quality, not cheap, not the stuff you get. And there's lots of these out. I will leave certain named shops out of it, but we get the general idea. You can get a lot of these, but they tend to be within the €5 to €6, sorry, 5 to 10 sort of prices. They're in that range, and from digital to analog, I've owned them. They break, they last a short time, and they never really stand the I suppose the test of time. This, on the other hand, seems to already be quite old. It has its kind of war wounds, has all of that on it. It's got a weight to it. It's really got a weight to it. And in a few minutes, when I explain what I did, and then go into this whole thing of what happened, which is actually quite funny, you'll see what I mean. So anyway, I got this, and I really liked it. Like, it was really nice, and it is really nice. So I said, okay, I'm going to try this out. So for those of you who don't know, probably you do, these are terribly simple to use. And if you've used one of them, you'll use any other one. Or maybe, but just bear with me. How they're used is, be it a bicycle, anything you're trying to get pressure on in terms of a tire, it is traditional tire valve. You uncover, you unthread the dust cap, and then you get this piece here, the nozzle, where you see it there. Okay. Got a little gasket seal, and the idea is you push it down on the valve, and you'll hear a hiss of air. You hold it for about 2, 3 seconds, that's it, and you take it off. And in that time, it will have shot the needle, the measuring needle, up to whatever measurement that is. Okay? Then you press this little button at the side, and it resets it. Go on to the next pressure. Okay? So here we are. So I get this, and I'm really taken by it. That's lovely. I'm gonna throw out all my other ones, and I'm gonna just use this because this is the one for me. So went to the car, offered it up, nothing, zero. Went around, nothing. It's like, oh, so I so want, like, you kind of, it's like, oh, I really want that. Don't tell me it's broken. I was in that real space of, this is something really nice and it has such meaning. So let's just, really, really. So here's another way something is quality. I decided I'm going to try and fix this. So the first thing I did was I managed, after a little bit of trying it, to unthread the valve piece that sits in the valve, okay? Believing that maybe there could be some blockage and get in and clean it. Okay. I quickly realized, given the quality it is, you could also open the entire thing. You could take the entire mechanism out. So on this glass here, there is a retaining ring. So I duly removed the retaining ring. After I removed the retaining ring, out came the glass. the little circular kind of silver, uh, you would call it kind of, well, silver kind of fascia here, and then out pop the mechanism. And tire pressure mechanisms are, I mean, they're simple, okay? They're just simple. But believing that if I did that, I might be able to fix it. So took it apart, looked at it. Everything was clear. I cleaned it up, got a bit of light oil, just dabbed around it, cleaned it up, put it back in. Reassembled the whole thing, like you do. Got it all back and said, right. Now, sorry, just before I go on, this little button here, the button that resets, okay, that was sticking. So when I got it back, that was now freed. So if nothing else, I felt, well, okay, well, there's something. So I went up. I think I went over to the motorbike this time, whatever. It didn't matter. I needed a tire with pressure. That's all I needed. I put it on. Nothing. So remember I mentioned earlier about heuristics. Now, the reason I use that is that since I was knee high to a grasshopper, any tire pressure tool I ever used and had worked that way. You push it down and it pushes it up. So in my mind, the schema, the heuristic, whatever you want to use, heuristic is probably not the most direct word, but again, I'm using it because it's a good rule of thumb, and we all get heuristics can lead us down dead ends. So while they're generally right, when I'm lecturing, for example, God forbid, here he goes, you might say, but when I'm lecturing and I'm talking to students about heuristics in psychology, I often use an example of if you hear there's a brilliant new guitar and they're selling it in a well-known shopping area, a shopping center, shopping outlet, and they're selling this really good guitar, great value, right? And there's only a limited supply. Now we know about these particular places. When there's a special buy, where is the special buy? It's the middle aisle. That's a kind of a quick heuristic as to something in a day-to-day way. Not exactly problem solving, but again, it's a rule of thumb. We'll go there first, right? Sometimes that can lead you down the wrong path. So here, let's go back to this, okay? So I push it on, not a beam. But then, and I'll leave this to you, a little voice, or just something said, do it again. Do it, do it again, and maybe hold the button. So I press the button, put it down on the valve and out. And as it released, as the pressure, you'd hear it going, tss, the needle shot up. Then I released it while still holding it on the valve. When I picked it up, I could read it. There you go. I pulled it apart for nothing. There was nothing wrong with it. Like a lot of things in life, there's often something wrong with our reasoning around it. There was nothing wrong with the thing. But because the roadmap and the schema of how these things normally are and how they normally work, I just applied it to this. And that's true of so many things in our lives. We think about it. It's true of so many things. We're a quick assumption. Because this was like, I really felt for this. So this was, no, I didn't want to part with it. But, I'm not keeping something that can't really function for me. So yeah, took it apart for nothing. But now I have something that's working really nicely. So was all we can owe to that, and is to thank dear Anthony, and thank you know thank something for telling me try that out. Right. So hopefully that hasn't bored you guys. It's very different videos as that I would do. Um, Not one that I would be in my usual vein. I hope to get back to those soon. But yeah, so we'll see how this goes. I might do a few more if people are interested. I will do a number of story times that might get into different things. Um, but before we go, it's an important thing to do. So, as I say, this while the video was inspired by my thinking around, you know, how our brains how we can trick ourselves and kind of the heuristics and the kind of fallacy we can find ourselves believing. Also, what mattered a lot with this particular gauge is the person who gave it to me, the person how I got it, and the meaning it has, together with that, with my trusty toolbox that I've been left with. And I suppose to end the video, and hear a bit of noise there, probably work out what that is. Um, when at the funeral, when Anthony's life was being celebrated, it was his one of his sisters, I think, did mention that if you are going down and you want to raise a glass, well, there was no other glass better to raise to Anthony because apparently this was his only drink, not sponsored, but by Heineken. So, with that said, to Anthony, take care, and we'll see you on the next video.